Hey, this video is internist conversation number 28, and I just recently spoke to this really smart internist guy, and he said something to me that I thought was pretty funny. He said that he was looking at that painting, The School of Athens. So this classic painting by Raphael, about 1510, it's in the stanza signature of the Vatican. It sort of divides Western civilization into the two viewpoints of Plato and Aristotle. Plato points up to the sky, like to the heavens, because he's a bit of a mystic. You know, they say Platonism was really the beginning of Christianity. Of course, there's the Old Testament, but Platonism is a foundational part of Christianity. Okay? And a lot of people thought, some people thought that was magnificent, like the Medicis and Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola just thought Plato was the best. Okay? And then the other point of view is Aristotle. He's sort of pointing down to the ground. He says, let's just focus on common sense, practical things here and there. The beginning of our study is the fact, okay? Practical things. Diogenes is here on the stairways. He was the sort of the homeless philosopher. He would do all kinds of funny things. He walked through Athens with a lantern saying he's looking for one honest man. He's the one who plucked the chicken and said, here's Plato's idea of a man, when Plato defined man as being a featherless biped. This is a painting of Heraclitus, but it's really a portrait of Michelangelo. Okay, Raphael had seen his magnificent Sistine Chapel and he was in awe of it, and he painted Michelangelo into this picture. Here's Socrates having a conversation with some young students, and there's a man here in a uniform, and that could be Alcibiades, that could be Pericles, it could also be Alexander the Great. I don't think anybody's sure of exactly who that is. Here's Epicurus, Epicureanism, sort of hedonism. Okay. Here is Euclid, Euclid's geometry, but that's also really a portrait of Bramante, the architect of the St. Peter's Basilica, the Vatican, as commissioned by Pope Julius. This right here is, I've seen some people call it Plotinus, and I've seen other names for this one as well. Anyways, I'm going to show you then what came out of the conversation here. So this was some ideas came out of the conversation. He actually said that that Dr. Day was like Plato, very much religious, pointing up to the heavens. Dr. McDougall was like Socrates, kind of old school and straightforward, focus on the food. He said, I'm like Aristotle, always trying to classify all these different things, and a little bit like also, the cultural stuff. Aristotle sort of tried to classify what he felt was the useful knowledge of his time. Nathan Pritikin would be like Pythagoras. Pythagoras, he's kind of an engineer by background. And then for Michelangelo, it's kind of like Kempner, the brooding genius. And then for Euclid, Bramante, kind of like Nelson, Jeff Nelson, sort of, he's a much more creative mind. He was an advertising executive, so he's in the film industry making movies and stuff, so he's got more of an aesthetic design sense like that. And one of the architects of the low-fat vegan movement with all these low-fat vegans that have talked over the years on his site, as well as his own extensive knowledge of nutrition and health. Okay, and then Raphael was also in the picture, of course. Hypatia, this is really kind of like Chef AJ, okay? And Chef AJ is the one who gave me a start. Nobody had ever heard of me before that. But anyways, I'll share with you now the conversation. That was just sort of the warm-up background to it. Okay, so the internist says, in that School of Athens paintings, McDougall's like Socrates, Day is like Plato, and you're like Aristotle. I said, what do you mean by that? And he says, McDougall's old school, just focusing on the food. He doesn't talk about religion or even stuff like water. And I said, yeah, so food's the most important thing. He's right about that. He's the one who figured out starch cures all the Western diseases. That's the most important thing, I said he's also more polite because he sees patients on telehealth. A lot of old people, they're kind of slow and stupid, kind of dopey. So you have to be very polite and sort of gentle and go a little slow at first when you talk to them. So he has to be that way. I said it was different for Dr. Day. She doesn't do telehealth, and her husband was rich, so she could speak more openly. And internist, he says, yeah, but, Day goes into a lot of religion and stress management and hydration in a big way, stuff like that. She goes into religion a lot. That's why she's pointing up to the sky in the School of Athens painting like Plato. And he says, you kind of are like her in the sense you go into religion a lot. I said, yeah, but I'm different about religion than she is. She was more interested in every little detail of doctrine, all these things about the afterlife and, this detailed exegesis about what everything in the Bible means. Me personally, I don't really care that much about the doctrine, the different translations of the Bible. She went through all the Bible translations, okay? I just think people should remember Genesis, man's created in the image of God, therefore part divine. That entitles him to natural rights. He's not like the other animals. Atheistic Darwinism says he's a talking monkey. He has no rights, just whatever his ruler gives him, and that can be taken away. One thing that I do have in common with her is, to me, nutrition is just a hobby, and I'm also totally banned and ostracized. And so I realize the internet's never going to allow me to become well-known. It's just a fact. And at first I was kind of sad about that because I like doing this stuff. I'd like to maybe do telehealth or something, but they're never going to let me. So I realized, though, but it makes it easier for me to be the best doctor in the world because I'm freed from the obligation of having to be polite, of having to avoid all these controversial subjects. I can just tell the truth. Nobody really cares because I'm such a small audience, shadow banned corner. Like I can tell the truth about things like, fluoride in the water is toxic. It's rat poison, okay? All that stuff is obvious to me. Whereas any doctor trying to build up a following on the internet, you can't talk about this stuff. You'll automatically get shadow banned. Internist, yeah, and Dr. Day, what did he say? She also, like Plato was pointing to the perfect forms in the sky, Aristotle pointing down to the earth, practical things. You're more like Aristotle. I said, yeah, I am. I'm basically the modern Aristotle. I summarize youthful health and cultural aesthetic information, a lot of the historical information, artistic stuff of our time. That's what I do like he did. And then internist says, McDougall, his diet gets people to lose weight because starches are the best way to satisfy hunger. That's why it works. He said if other people ate that way, they could all lose weight. I said, yeah, but almost everybody who eats that way is thin. Okay, 1 billion out of 1 billion rice eaters are skinny. Internist, yeah, and it's sustainable. But the vast majority of people are not even willing to try it. And I said, yeah, I know. I tell people, just try it for 3 months. But and then you could always change your mind, go to something else. But most people are not willing to do that. I see these fat ladies that never, probably had a boyfriend in their life, and they're not even willing to give it a try for 3 months. They've totally given up on themselves. Internist, what do you think about RFK's new food pyramid? Well, it's a joke, of course. Obviously, I replied. I'm going to make a video about it later. And I said, oh, by the way, I think I figured out ME/CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. He goes, well, that's interesting, but I got to get going. We'll talk later. All right, so anyways, that's it for Conversation 28. Hope you found that helpful.